with regards to who would be funding, who has an interest. That's where it begins to become really surprising, and that actually is not too difficult to verify even from secular but reputable news sources. For instance, if you were to go to Google today and type in transhumanism, you would find something like 250,000 web pages now around the world that are dedicated to both the study, philosophy, but this new worldview called transhumanism. However, if you were to type in genetic engineering laboratories, you'd find more than 24 million websites in the world now dedicated to the subject of genetic engineering, which is, of course, one of the sciences that the transhumanists aspire to believe that this is going to be used to alter what it means to be a human. Now, on the ground, what does it mean? Here in the United States of America, you may remember where a few years ago, 2006, I believe, George W. Bush, in a State of the Union address, called for legislation to be enacted that would prohibit the creation of human-animal chimeras. And he wasn't just talking about embryos for experimentation, because he also talked about prohibiting the creation of exotic human life forms that could be patented. Why would the President of the United States, in a speech of record, be calling for legislation that would prohibit this technology? It's because it's emerging very quickly. And we know now that there are those rogue scientist wannabes, the Dr. Moreaus, who are already raising these to full maturity. And we can come to some of those admissions in this interview as well. For example, one of the first things that President Obama did at the executive level, as soon as he became president, he overturned restrictions that had been put in place by President Bush, which would have prohibited federal dollars, American taxpayer money, flowing in to pay for experiments to be done on human-animal chimeras and other forms of science such as stem cell sciences, which is also important to the transhumanist movement. But what most of the public doesn't realize, when we're talking about stem cell sciences, we're almost always talking about the creation of a human-animal chimera from which those stem cells are being derived. But now tax dollars in the United States from the federal level are flowing into thousands of laboratories. In the state that I live in Missouri, for instance, there is a farm that is raising transgenic pigs that are part human. They're using these pigs to actually grow organs in a test in the hopes that these humanized organs in the pigs can then be transplanted into people who are on donor waiting lists. Now, you know, years ago they called this xenotransplantation, and they had hoped to just implant entire pig organs inside humans, but the human bodies in the tests kept wanting to reject these pig organs. Now, though, with human DNA actually growing inside of a pig, we may be able to create an organ that can solve this problem of organ donation. But that kind of funding from the federal level now is flowing into states in a way that had been prohibited under the Bush administration. But it goes deeper. In 2006, a fantastic thing happened. The Department of Health, which is the largest department in the United States of America, which funds research into health issues, provided $773,000 to Case Law School in Cleveland, Ohio, for one reason: to develop over a 24-month period the guidelines that will be used, according to their own press release at Case Law School, used for creating policy for human enhancement regarding the next step in human evolution. Max Melhelm, who is the law professor and a bioethicist at Case Law School, was given the responsibility of leading the team of 24 to 36 months field study, if you will, using actual test subjects, human subjects, according to the original press release, would be used for devising how policy, government policy, can be extended to human non-humans. Well, because this started in 2006, and we knew that the target ending date for this study, which was being done not just by Max Melhelm, but law professors, bioethicists, genetic engineers, people who work in the fields of genetic alteration, that within 24 months to 36 months this field study would be done. 2009 was the target date for the report to be issued. So I waited with bated breath. In what way did Case Law School actually use human test subjects to provide what the government wants, guidelines to be used for human enhancement, to set the policy for how, for instance, will the Constitution, how will the Bill of Rights be extended to a human, non-human? How much of a living entity has to be human before it can be protected under our laws? Must it be 90% human and 10% something else, 50% human? So I wanted to know. Well, the end of the test came and no public statements have been forthcoming. But what I noticed was that Professor Melhelm now, immediately at the end of the study, started traveling the United States giving lectures at universities. And he's giving 2 different lectures, and this is the title of his lectures. One is called Directed Evolution, Public Policy and Human Enhancement. And the second lecture he's given now is Transhumanism and the Future of Democracy. And you can go to the Arizona State University, and that second lecture is actually available as a podcast. You can download the lecture unless they remove it from the time this film is made until the time somebody might go there to download it, but you can actually go and download it. So here you not only have the President of the United States loosing federal funds to go into research on human-animal chimeras, stem cell lines, various kinds of laboratory experiments on humans that could then be applied later on down the road through a transhumanist philosophy, the use of those technologies, but it's actually being funded through the U.S. Department of Health to actually set the policy and guidelines for how the law will be applied to human non-humans. It even goes deeper. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, has for over the last decade been funding to the tune literally of billions of dollars research into what they call the Extended Performance Warfighter. They have since removed the document, the original document on the Extended Performance Warfighter program from DARPA's own website, but a person can Google and find the same articles that were originally published being cached across the internet. The interesting parts about the Extended Performance Warfighter is that it even includes literally altering the DNA of soldiers. The public may more commonly hear this referred to as super soldier technology. But it got interesting this year. The 2011 budget for DARPA, which can be downloaded at Wired magazine if a person wants to go and read the DARPA budget, allows millions of dollars for what they are calling biodesign. Biodesign is actually outlined in the budget. The purpose of it has to do with immortalism. The purpose of it is to literally discover how cellular destruction occurs and why in regeneration of cellular decay, we as humans don't wind up at 100% again, and we begin to age. And DARPA has an interest in figuring out how to get around the decaying process of cellular life. And they use the term creating an immortal organism. But it's more than just an organism. They consider it to be potentially a lethal force that can be used in military application. Wired magazine actually referred to it as a living, breathing creature. And DARPA admits that the force of this living creature, this immortal organism, could be so potent that it ought to also have what they called a kill switch introduced into its organism, so that in case it gets out of hand, we could throw the switch and stop it, or if it became available to our enemies, we could throw the switch and stop it. So that in the United States, we know that from the federal level, under Obama, revenue is flowing into this research. We know that from the U.S. Department of Health, revenue is flowing into this research. From the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And if a person wants to do their homework, they'll find out that it's also the Air Force, the Navy, the Army. All of our military laboratories are funding now to the tunes of millions and billions of dollars research into fields that also include the altering of their soldiers for the purposes of having total battlefield domination in the future. But a person should also be aware that this technology is not just limited to the United States of America. In Australia, in China, in Great Britain, All around the world, literally tens of thousands of laboratories are receiving both federal and private funding for this kind of research. In the United States, even when Bush had called for restrictions on federal funding, it didn't stop the research here. It simply was being done through private grants and private dollars. There were no laws that were stopping people from doing human-animal research here. But now it starts to get really interesting in that even the scientific community is making admissions, which of course I was suspicious of anyway for some time. There was a Reuters article about 6 months ago called "Scientists Want Debate on Animals with Human Genes." And it turns out that the scientists that were being interviewed were the same scientists that 24 months ago were involved in what was called the human embryology discussions out of Great Britain. Laboratories wanted to receive federal funding, public money, to finance their investigations and experiments, which included altering humans and altering animals, at least at the embryonic stage. And there was such public outcry in Britain about it that the government decided to have a public forum, and they allowed different people, ethicists, bioethicists, even religious scholars, to weigh in on the question of whether or not it would be ethical to begin altering humans at, of course, in the beginning, the embryonic level, but later on perhaps to full maturity. At the end of those discussions, and there were some very interesting things during the discussions, by the way. For instance, the Vatican had 2 bishops present during these discussions, and the 2 bishops for the Vatican weighed in saying that if a woman participated in these experiments by providing eggs or ovum, and then later if she had a conflict of conscience and decided that she wanted to raise this half human, half animal as her own child, that she ought to have the right to do so. And I believe that the Vatican's bishops were not really making that argument in sincerity as much as they were trying to illustrate the tortured ethics, the kind of unanswerable questions about, do they have a soul? In Israel, some of the religious scholars in Israel have weighed in, talking about if we create a transgenic animal or clone a transgenic animal and it is part cow, how much of it would need to be human before it would be protected under our laws, and or if the majority of it was cow, could we then offer it as a burnt sacrifice? So illustrating once again that there really isn't any way to wrap any kind of Judeo-Christian ethic around what we are now doing, but it hasn't stopped us from doing it. Well, those scientists who have been receiving funding now from the British government for the past 24 months are back. And the Reuters headline, "Scientists want public debate on animals with human genes," was very specific in that they want to know how far the public now would be willing to let them go. And there were 2 things in this Reuters article that were very telling. One, the scientists themselves admitting that among the scientists involved in this research, they are comfortable now with up to 50% human-animal integration. See, the public mostly is still under the impression that this is being done at the embryonic level and that the amount of human DNA in a transgenic animal is so minute as to be excusable. Well, what we learned in this article is it is up to at least 50% human-animal integration, and that the scientists involved with it are comfortable. But where they want the debate to go now is, can we raise these to full maturity in the public's knowledge and experiment on part humans, part animals that are fully grown? And by admitting that that's now where they want the public to be comfortable with this research, they also said that they knew that there are some rogue scientists out there that are not operating with federal dollars, and they're getting ahead of them in this technology. And it could even become a new kind of a weapon of mass destruction. It could at a minimum become a molecular biological nightmare, because now by crossing over species barriers in ways that neither evolution nor God allowed for, we are completely uncertain about how, when this gets out of the box, where it may lead us.